Good morning, class. Welcome back from spring break. I know you guys are still at home, and I know that you're still enjoying this time off that we've had over the last few weeks. Today we're going to pick back up on our videos and pick back up on our beef breeds. Up until this point in ag science, we've talked about terms about what a bull is, what a heifer is, cow, calf. We've talked a little bit about castration. We've also talked about some herd management practices, and we may do a little remote video from the farm over the next few days and pick back up on some things that we in the beef industry are going to use in order to make our herd successful and try to boost our profit margins. Now, today we're back in the shop and we're going to look at two breeds, add to your reservoir that you have, and of other breeds, and take these breeds and just compare them and let you guys go back and watch those videos that we've already made and try to figure out what is the difference between these breeds of cattle. Because maybe at first glance you think, oh well, they're all the same. They're all beef cattle. And that's true, and it's not. And as we've said in other videos, different beef breeds bring different things to the table. And is there any beef breed that just excels in everything and is at the best of everything? Not necessarily. It's just in what the producer is trying to do, what part of the market he's trying to find. Now, I feel like, again, we need to touch on something before we get started with this, and that is if you've been to the store lately, and I hope you haven't, but if you have been to the store, try to check on meat prices are up. I can tell you from a producer standpoint, our prices are down. So somebody's making money, and it's not the producer. So as you're sitting at home and you're trying to figure out what to do, maybe you're getting a little tired of that video game that you're playing, you're tired of watching somebody else on YouTube playing a video game, maybe go back and do some research and figure out where's that money going. If it's not going to the beef cattle producer, who's it going to and why? And that'll be a good little research progress project for you. So today we're going to look at these two breeds. We're going to first look at Chianina, and then we're going to look over at the Gelbvieh breed. Now, starting off with the Chianina breed, I want to go ahead and say it's kind of hard to pronounce sometimes for some people, especially if your southern is getting stuck in your mouth and you can't exactly say it right. So the Chianina breed also sometimes goes by Chi, and that is spelled C-H-I. So I'll be referring mostly to them as Chi cattle, sometimes as Chianina cattle, but as we start especially talking about crossbreeding them with other breeds, for example, if I was going to breed one to an Angus, then that offspring would be a Chi Angus, not a Chianina Angus, okay? And that just makes things a lot easier. But if you go back and you check out this breed originates in Italy. And during World War II, the guys that were stationed there ran upon these cattle and really liked them. And it took a few years, probably somewhere in the 70s, before any key semen had started to make its way over to the United States. And then, after a while, it was made where actual live cattle were coming over. Now, physically, key cattle have a few things going for them. One thing is size and growth. These breeds, this breed of cattle tends to grow out well, as far as grow quickly, have some size on it, and if you're not worried about keeping too moderately framed of cattle, just straight Chianina type cattle work out okay. Something else that you'll notice between this picture of this bull and this cow here, this mature cow, a lot of times they'll have a little difference in color. The bulls tend to hang on to that steel gray type color, where a lot of the times the cows will stay straight white, kind of a bleached white. You also look at some of their pigment and their tail, even the end of their nose, that pigment on their nose is going to be a dark color, almost a black color. So that's just something that's very distinctive about the Key cattle. Something that also that's very important to understand about Chianina cattle is that they are most heavily weighted towards the muscle categories. So they're known as a terminal breed. They are a heavy muscled, well-defined muscular animal, and you definitely see that in the picture of this bull. Now, as every breed, there's drawbacks with Key cattle. One thing straight away, if you look at this bull, and even if you go down and look at this cow, is they lack a little bit of that volume, that spring to the rib and depth that we like to see in cattle. Now, does that mean that they're a bad breed? No. But just like everything, it has its ups, it has its downs. As we talk a lot of times, and we use vehicles as examples. Despite what brand you like, there's good things about all of them, and there's bad things about all of them. There's things we'd like to see done better in all of them, and there's things that we absolutely love about all of them. So, if you take that discussion to cattle, there's a lot of difference between these models of cattle, and you just have to decide what's going to work best for you in your program. The last thing that we're going to touch on with the Key cattle is they typically have very small udders, which also alludes to the fact, at least in this breed, that they are not as high in milk production as we like to see. So let's go back to the idea of crossbreeding a Chianina with an Angus to get a Key Angus offspring. What do you think is an example of something that comes from the Angus breed that we've talked about that would help out with the Chianina breed? If you guessed milk, you're right. That high milk production in an Angus bred into the Chianina genetics can produce an offspring that will have heavy muscle, but also help to produce that extra milk. So now we'll move over to the Gelbies. Now Gelbies are a really interesting breed. I've come to respect them a lot over the years, especially in my years on the judging circuit in college. But these guys originated in Germany and once again were brought over in the early 70s by way of semen. Now, in case that seems weird to you, just give you some examples here in the beef industry in the U.S. today. We have a lot of cattle, especially dairy cattle, but even in the beef breeds, we have a lot of cattle that are artificially inseminated. We have former students from Richland here that have gone on to vet school and are now running their own artificial insemination and embryo transfer businesses, even in our county, and that's awesome. But this is just another way that we can get cows bred without having to have a bull in the pasture. And maybe in a future episode we can talk about what are the benefits between all that. But if we go back and we talk about Gelbie, they were initially brought over by way of semen straws, by way of genetics, and then finally live animals started coming over this way. If we look, these Gelbie are going to be red in color. They can also be black in color. So that kind of lends itself towards the heavy dose of black cattle that we have in today's market. They tend to have strong pigmentation, so that again in their nose, in their scrotum, and their udder, and they are traditionally horned cattle. But now, as we've gone along and selective breeding has happened, now we actually can lend ourselves to seeing more and more polled Gelbie out there. They tend to look a lot like an Angus, and I hope I don't offend any Angus guys with that, but one thing that I noticed when I've seen Gelbie cattle up close, they tend to be just a little bit heavier boned than your Angus and tend to pack a little bit more muscle than your Angus. And another great quality about Gelbie, they're traditionally moderately framed. Now, I've used that term already today, so I want to end today by kind of explaining what I mean by moderately framed and why that can be a good thing. So let's start off by it this way. When you go to the store and you buy a steak, you're looking for a relatively a uniform size piece of steak. Not so much with hamburger meat, but when we buy that ribeye, we want our ribeyes to be a certain size, okay? So let's transition that to our live animals. If I had a live animal, if I had a steer that I slaughtered, but before I slaughtered him, I let him get too big, then the chances are my ribeyes are going to be bigger. And as crazy as it sounds, it's not going to fit on my plate the same as it would if it was a little smaller. Now let's go to the other side of things. If I get a ribeye, I want it to be good size. I don't want a little, filet mignon. I'm not one of these little steak guys. I want a good piece of meat, 3/4 of an inch thick, and that ribeye just nice and juicy. So if I have my cattle too small when they get to the point of slaughter, then my cuts of meat are going to be too small. So it's all about keeping a balance of size in our cattle. And so those steers and those market heifers that are going to be slaughtered, we want to make sure that we keep our cattle at a certain size. When they get kind of to that plateau of, hey, I've grown as much as I need to grow in order to be slaughtered. So we're talking, 1,100 pounds. When they get to that point, okay, wherever they're at physically, size-wise, they're fixing to go and they're going to hang on a rail. And that means that animal's is being slaughtered and its carcass is hanging on a literal rail being slid through a packing house. When it gets to that point, okay, it's got to be the right size as well as have the right amount of muscle and marbling and fat content. So just some things to think about, because there's a whole lot more that goes into getting that steak on your plate than you probably realize. So that's where we're going to end our video today. I want to thank you for tuning in. If you've got any questions, send them to me. You can email them. You can send me a message on Google Classroom. That will be fine. You can type them in a comment below if you have any questions. We're going to continue to make these videos as long as we can and move on to some other subjects. But I also want to let you guys know that I appreciate you guys. I don't know how much you've been thinking about school or how little you've been thinking about school, but I hope that this whole experience and being out has brought a new light to why being at school is important and really why your education is important. I hope you guys are finding ways to grow as individuals rather than, just spending a whole bunch of screen time. Get out, enjoy nature, because I can guarantee you there's a lot of lessons that are still left to be learned that you can learn without sitting in a physical classroom. I want to continue to offer you guys these videos. So if you have any questions, things that, hey, Mr. Doggett, can you go over those things again? Let me know, and we'll try to get those things posted as quick as we can. So thanks for having us.